All right, ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome to our marketing research class. And today I'm going to be sharing a screen so that we go through the chapter. So we'll be doing chapter 11 in the textbook. It will be a good idea to also have a textbook in front of you because we're going to be going through it so that you can highlight as well as to write some comments in the textbook itself. So before we start with class, as usual, I just need you to participate in the chat box here. So here in the chat box, please just for now, just use any emoticon face there or any smiley face, show your mood, show your present, greeting us here. And then we're going to start with class. Just that is to also confirm that you can hear me very well as you can see the screen. Thank you for that, M. Komana. So we'll be starting with class just now while you are organizing textbooks and everything. So I'll be sharing the screen so far. So you'll remember that the page numbers that are shown on the PowerPoint slides are outdated. So the new page number for chapter 11, Fieldwork, is page 245. And regarding fieldwork, where we conduct the investigation. So first of all, we need to talk about what is fieldwork and define what is fieldwork. And they provide that definition there in the chapter under the introduction there. So let's look into that definition and you can also highlight. So it's important to understand fieldwork in terms of the research proposal as well. Where does it come through? So before we provide this definition, let's look into a research proposal quickly. And this should also motivate you to always have these guidelines of a research proposal whenever you are doing marketing research, because these guidelines, we use them throughout the year. And basically, this is the output of our module. So at the end of the year, you should be able at least to provide that research proposal. So as far as we can remember, it should be prescribed learning resources. Welcome. So you'll remember that the framework, we get it under the tab here written research proposal notes and exercises. So we're quickly going to download that research proposal framework. You must always have this research proposal framework. It makes it easier as well to answer questions regarding the research proposal, because you already have the definitions here or the discussion. It just needs practical application. So usually when we come and develop a research proposal, you'll remember we start with the introduction and we do all the data collection, the primary data. So we want to talk about fieldwork where it comes in. In this case, we start by indicating the primary data, and with the primary data, we talk whether it's going to be surveys if it's quantitative, or it's going to be focus groups if it's qualitative. And we look under data collection approach. This is whereby you choose whether these are telephone interviews, web-based surveys, personal interviews, and so forth. So now, this is where fieldwork comes in. The fieldwork, let's look at the definition now, because we understand that under the research proposal, we must propose how are we going to collect the data. And now fieldwork, it talks about that part, which is data collection. So quickly looking into the slide, you will see here they say fieldwork is the process of collecting information. I'm not happy with the word information of the definition here, so I will suggest that we change that, and I will propose why we indicate that. So I think it's data that we are collecting, or data if you use potato. So the process of collecting data outside of a library, outside of a workplace, outside of a lab. That's what is referred to as fieldwork. So why are we saying it's a process of collecting data instead of information? Remember, if you differentiate between data and information, is that with data, we're talking about meaningless numbers, meaningless information, which is not been classified or summarized. But now with information, we're talking about a specific statement that has been summarized, as well as showing percentages and so on. So in other words, we are not collecting information, we are simply collecting data, because we'll be asking people questions, and then we'll just be circling the numbers in the questionnaire, and those numbers are meaningless. So that's why I'm saying, actually, this is to say data. So if we change that definition, it makes more sense. Process of collecting data outside the lab. And once we have that data, remember, we're going to analyze it. And the process of analyzing data, this is whereby we talk about, once you analyze it, it becomes information. So that I had to emphasize. They also talk about fieldwork is research work done in the field. So hence the word fieldwork. So what do we mean by in the field? We mean simply out of an office or out of your own home or out of the buildings. So this is whereby you will have to go to a mall, for example, to ask people questions, or you go to a school, you go to into the park, the towns, and so on, or house to house. All those things are out of the office, and then you conduct field work. As the picture that is illustrated here, you will see that this is field work, because the interviewer, which is the field worker that you see here, is interviewing the respondent, but they are not at the office space. So hence the word field work. So what do we take from this definition, which is a very important, is that we've got different types of data collection methods, and these different types of data collection methods, we actually covered them previously. So I'm quickly going to show another slide here so that I don't lose you here. So we started covering them when we were discussing chapter 7. So whenever talking about data collection methods, there is this diagram that is shown in the textbook. And then you'll remember that we're talking about primary data, because now we are conducting interviews. We are actually interviewing people. So this is new data, it's not an old data. So under quantitatives, we said if it's quantitative data, we can use surveys. And you'll remember with quantitative, it's simply meaning that you are interviewing a lot of people. So it's a large sample size, where else if it was a small sample size, like 10 people or 15 people, it was going to be qualitative. So we're also testing a hypothesis. If the case study is about that, there's a hypothesis, we will go this route, quantitative. And now under surveys, these are the data collection methods I'm referring to. So we've got personal interviews, telephone interviews, mail surveys, and web-based surveys. So if you look into these different types of data collection methods, not all of them we can refer to them and say we are conducting field work. So in other words, some of these data collection methods, fieldwork does not apply to them, because in other words, if you go back to the definition to understand why we say that, is because when we're talking about fieldwork, we are saying this is a process of collecting data outside of a lab, outside of a library or workplace setting. This is a research done in the field. So this fieldwork will only apply to a specific data collection method whereby a researcher hire field workers or hire interviewers, and then they go outside of a workplace. So I'm going to propose a first learning activity so that we can participate. Please just use a chat box for this learning activity. You still have another learning activity to understand this chapter with the quizzes later on. So I'm going to call this one learning activity 1, as I'm sharing the screen as well. So what I need you to do here in this learning activity, I want you to indicate which data collection methods, basically, which data collection methods. Okay, let's write it here. Identify data collection methods whereby fieldwork process does not apply. So I'm going to add those data collection methods here. So we said we've got personal interviews, like you saw on other side. So I want you to identify which one fieldwork process does not apply. So personal interviews, telephone, we've got mail, and we've got web-based. Okay, so I've posted the learning activity 1 in the chat box there. So I'm going to mute myself while you are typing those answers. Just indicate the data collection method whereby you think fieldwork does not apply. Remember, fieldwork is collecting data. It's collecting data in the field out of the office. All right, let's continue. Thank you for that participation, M. Komana. Thank you, M. Gonya, for that as well. So now you are both correct. Mail, as well as web-based, as well as telephone interviews. All those ones, there is no field work. So basically, only personal interviews, we can say fieldwork applies, because let's go back to the definition once again. Is the process of collecting data outside of a lab, outside of an office. So doing personal interviews, we simply mean you go to the mall, that is fieldwork. But now if I'm gonna do telephone interviews, I'll be calling these respondents from the office. That is not fieldwork because I'm in the office space. If I'm doing actually something such as web-based, it's even worse, because web-based, we don't hire field workers. Remember, the computer will become our field workers, whereby the links are sent and so on. So there is no hold that process. So just take into account that this process is for personal interviews. It's also process for other data collection methods that are not quantitative. And I'm talking about things such as your in-depth interview in qualitative methods, as well as your focus group, because that could happen outside of a lab, outside of a field, because you can conduct those things anywhere in a mall and so on. So that is a definition of field research. So we will be taking you through the steps of that research. I'm not sure who your mic was unmuted. Maybe you wanted to ask a question or comment. So please, you can ask any questions. Just unmute yourself. Okay, if you, ladies and gentlemen, you have any questions or comment, remember I'm not able to see if you are raising hands in the chat box there or in the Microsoft Teams app. So you just have to unmute your mic there and just disturb me, or just say ask any questions that you have. Otherwise, you won't have enough opportunity because I'm not seeing the raising hands there. So jump in anytime you want to. So now we can start with the basically looking at the bottom of the page on page 245. You will see they talk about the 4 important aspects of fieldwork. And now these 4 important aspects of fieldwork, if you are having a pen or a pencil, you just highlight them in the textbook. That's what we're going to focus in this chapter, or you just write them there. The first one, planning fieldwork, is shown there as written number 1. So you can highlight that. And then on the next page, you've got preparing, which is on page 247. That's number 2. And then you will see selecting, training and controlling interviewers on page 248. That's what we're going to look at, that process there. And lastly, we've got basically training. And you will see in terms of training, they talk about it in terms of the next page, page 250, training of field workers on top there. And those are the 4 important aspects of field work. So basically this, you can refer to it as some sort of a process, or the stages or the steps that we follow when we are planning or when we are actually considering field work. Let's look under planning. As a field worker, remember we are researchers now. We've got personal interviews in place that are going to take place. Let's say maybe next month we want to go to Main Lane Mall and start there interviewing people. So we're going to consider these 4 steps. So the first thing that we look into is regarding planning or organizing. And what we look into under this planning part, you will see they are also in the textbook. You can try by comparing what is on the slides and what is written in the textbook and just highlight some keywords there. All those ones that are shown on the slides are also shown in the textbook as bullets. But what it simply means is that we must have 2 types of things. The first one is called a fieldwork program. So a fieldwork program is something similar to any program. This could be like a wedding program or any event program that shows that what is going to take place at what time. So even with fieldwork, we've got that program. We must develop that. So this could be just 1 page. And then we've got a fieldwork and that fieldwork program will consist of different sections or different headings there. The first one, just take into account that you have to do this practically. So we will try and provide some practical example with each here. First one, we've got operators subdistricts. So these are the geographical locations that they are talking about there. So basically, if we are going to collect data, let's say, let's use a practical example whereby we want to interview students at TUT. And now when we're going to interview these students at TUT, we're going to do personal interviews by going to bus terminals, going to cafeterias, going to different sub-district of the university. Maybe go next to the library there, go to fountains area. Some they will be sitting next to stadiums and so on. And then those are the sub-districts. So first of all, we have to divide our fieldwork program and say we've got these sub-districts. So I've indicated your hockey field and so on. You just list them here. If it's a different geographic area where you interview, this is not about TUT students. Maybe this is about a shopping mall. We want to interview shoppers at Main Lane Mall. We will have. Yes, you have a question? All right, continuing here. So I'm just gonna try and mute here. So as I was saying, with these sub-discretes that we're talking about, if this we were doing it in a shopping mall, so this would be our food court areas, for example, that is a sub-discrete in a shopping mall. The mall aisles as well, maybe that's where you can interview other people, could be entertainment venues and so on. So we list all those sub-discrete. Number of questionnaires per sub-discrete, depending on the number of interviewers. So the next step here is to provide practicality of questionnaires that needs to be completed at each section. So if we go to our previous example about TUT interviewing students, this will be things such as, for example, whereby you indicate that at hockey field, we must, first of all, we must go backward. Think about the sample size, the total number of people that needs to be interviewed. So let's say we must interview 1,000 students for this research project. And then we've got 5 sub-discrete. For example, our 5 sub-discrete, let's say this was another study. I'm going to provide as many practical examples as possible. So please try and keep up with as much. So I'm going to use a different one. So let's say we have to conduct research and do personal interviews in the city of Tshwane, that is Pretoria. And regarding city of Tshwane, we can divide it into 5 sub-discretes. So if this is Pretoria North, Pretoria East, Pretoria West, Pretoria South, as well as Pretoria Central, those are becomes our sub-discrete. And if we have to interview 1,000 people living in the city of Tshwane, we will say maybe for each sub-discrete, let's interview 200. 200 at Pretoria North, 200 at Pretoria West, 200 at Pretoria East, and then we are able to divide those questionnaires per field worker. So knowing that the next step is to indicate that, okay, we will have 10 field workers, and if it's 1,000 questionnaires that need to be completed, we can say each field worker must complete 100 field interviews, because your sample size will always be equivalent or talking to all these elements that we are dealing with here. Daily quota is another important aspect that needs to be indicated. Daily quota, it talks about how many interviews should be done on daily basis. So you must estimate the number of time that it takes to interview one person. Usually you will see that most of our questionnaires, we say it should take respondents about 10 to 15 minutes to complete the questionnaire. So the standard time is around 15 minutes. And then looking in terms of personal interviews, if it's around 15 minutes, we can plan something such as 4 interviews per hour. And if we are conducting these interviews the whole day, let's say we've got 7 hours a day, obviously maybe we start at 8 in the morning up until 4, minusing 1 hour of lunch, then we've got those 7 hours. So our daily quota will be something such as 4 per hour, 4 times 7, and then that will be 28 interviews per day from each person. So that could be our daily quota, or we can make it a bit less, because knowing that some interviewers might provide things such as the reasons or they are unwilling to participate. So we can say instead of 28, interview at least 20 or at least 15, because we have to prepare. So you just indicate the number of interviews that should be done per day for each interviewer and the total number. So depending on how many interviewers you have, if you've got 15 interviewers and then they have to complete 10 interviews per day, so our daily quota is 150 per day. So you just need to indicate those numbers there. And then stratification. The word stratas, you'll remember this comes, we'll discuss it in chapter 10 as well regarding the sampling. A strata is simply a group, is a cluster, another way that we can use there. Clusters, so these are segments if you want to use another term. So stratification, it talks about how many interviewers will go to a specific location, or maybe interviewing a specific group number of people or a specific group of people. This could be like our stratas will include males, it will include older people. Maybe we've got those screening questions whereby we want to interview a certain number of demographics. For example, we must at least have 50% males in our respondents, 50% females, 20% they should be students, 20% they should be young adults, 20% they should. So those are the stratifications that must be indicated there, as well as how interviewers will go around doing those screening questions and so on. Places of residence, this only applies basically when we do interviewers or we do interviews. in a specific area whereby we don't need to go home. So basically places of residence, you will list where each interviewer is staying at. This is for contact. You will see in the last bullet, it talks about telephone numbers of contact points. So these are for emergency points. So each and every field worker will be having this field work program. It will be indicating all these aspects to help them do the interview process smoothly and consistently with other field workers. So there is 3 things that are mentioned here. Fieldwork program is influenced by questionnaire and the subject, the sample design, and field workers. So your answers obviously will be different depending on whether the topic is about green electricity, which is general, or it's about obesity, which could be a sensitive and embarrassing, and so on. And it could the questions that you ask, depending on the subject that you're investigating, have a huge influence on the program, on how many interviews should be done per day. So in a textbook, you just need to take into account those 3. They talk about them in detail in the textbook. You'll see questionnaire and a subject, and then they ask those questions. How long does it take to complete the questionnaire? Is there a possibility of respondents being sensitive about the subject? So you just consider all those ones. Basically, there is no practicality of that part that you do when you are planning this. So it's simply you consider whether the sample design as well as the field workers, they will be people who are young or old. Are they actually multilingual or bilingual? Can they speak different languages to explain different concepts or jargons that we find in our interview process? So it does not mean that you have to provide practicality here. It just mean that you have to just consider that your answers will be different from subject to subject, from time to time, depending on all those. So our fieldwork program will only include this part. And then if anything does not apply in the certain study, for example, places of residence, you just leave it out. For example, maybe during the interview, you hired students, they stay at rest, they don't need any place of residence. You'll just have the telephone of contact points for that, so you leave that one out. The next step is to preparing. And now in terms of preparing for interviews, so remember we have developed this program, we have it, so if we have 5 interviewers or 5 field workers, we're gonna print 5 that we're gonna give it to them. And now we must actually prepare. We haven't met these interviewers yet. Remember, we are researchers. As a researcher, we do this our own. So we are still preparing without the interviewers after planning or organizing.
Is it me who's having bad connection or it's you?
I'm not sure. You can't hear me well, or am I cutting or something?
You cutting, so I don't know, because it keeps on saying searching for network on the screen. So I don't know if it's mine or yours.
Maybe it will be good to find out from other students. Maybe that could provide us with the clarity. Anyone experiencing bad connection or? Okay, it seems like all other students are fine. Maybe
Yeah,
it's your network.
maybe
I
it's
don't know.
mine.
Yeah, but since everyone is quiet, we cannot make a conclusion that everyone is fine. Maybe they can't hear us even now. Ladies and gentlemen, anyone please comment and indicate how is your network or signal or connection? Okay, thank you for that, Pitsuma, indicating that your connection is fine. Mkomana, yours is fine too. Muloto, thank you all for participating for that. So it seems like it's only yours, dear. So at least we are recording, so we'll be able to play back and post this. So if in case you miss anything, once we posted the video, we'll be able to catch up as well as we are doing revision. So let's continue in terms of the next step. So now regarding preparing, you will see that is on page 247, but it's written in a paragraph there. But all those answers or all those aspects or elements that you see on the slides, they are there. So if you have a highlighter or a pencil, you can quickly highlight. You'll see the first one is on the first paragraph, whereby they talk about questionnaires, sufficient questionnaires. We must prepare sufficient stationery. Those are things such as pencil, the maps of the area, the official documents. Remember the official document, this is an important aspect which we talk about it a lot when we consider the ethics of research or the ethical aspects. Remember at the end of the research proposal, there is that part where we indicate how we're going to consider the ethical aspects of the research, and we talk about access there. How are we going to access it? These places where we interview people. So official document, for example, that could be that letter that we must print out, or we must request permission from, let's say if we are going to a mall, we speak to a mall manager that, can we please conduct interviews at Main Lane, can we please do this on this day? And if they agree, and then they sign that letter, so that if securities or gatekeepers, they give us problem, we provide them with that permission letter. So basically in the preparing stage, it's all about printing. This is about administrative. Think about the word admin and administrative. It talks about paperwork most of the time. It talks about everything. So we're gonna print the questionnaires. For example, when we do this practically, if we have to interview 1,000 people, we cannot only print 1,000 questionnaires. We must take into account for situations whereby we make mistakes, we need new questionnaires and so on. So let's print at least 100 extra. So we indicate here we're going to print 1,100 questionnaires. Sufficient stationery, for example, maybe we are using pencil to complete the questionnaire. It will depend on the number of field workers. If we hire 10 field workers, we hire 10 interviewers that are going to conduct interviews, we buy 20 pencils, at least let them have 2 each in case of anything there. So you just become as practical as possible. Maps of the research area, if we can get that map of TUT, usually it's easy to get it because the university can provide us with it, or we can simply use the map on the website that shows that there is this hockey field is there, and then our football field, our rugby field, where it is for, maybe we hired interviewers which are not familiar with the place as well. So just take into account as well, when you hire these field workers that are gonna conduct these interviews, it will be recommended, or it's very recommended or most practical if you hire people who know the place. So if you are dealing with students at TUT, hire other students to conduct marketing research. So in my own basically opinion, I'm saying that as researchers, especially researchers, the students who are doing masters at TUT, basically they have to hire field workers, and usually you will see at some stage there was some sort of complaints, or it was something such that did not make sense, whereby brands, for example, Coca-Cola, or let's say Unilever, any brand comes to TUT and they do these promotions there, but they tend to hire maybe engineering students, or they will hire people who are actually not gaining anything. It will be nice or recommended that marketing students should be the one that getting that practical experience. So anything that comes to TUT is about marketing research, is about promotion. Marketing students should be first in the line, but we know it doesn't work like that. It always works about connections and who actually heard about it and so on. So in other words, in simple words, people who are familiar with the content, people who are familiar with the place, they tend to bring more results, more good results, because it's easy for them to be flexible and improvise in such situations. As well as the introduction file, we must have that. So like I've said, administrative requirements is all about paperwork. The next step is to select the interviewers. So we've already printed our fieldwork program. We've already printed our questionnaires. We already printed everything. So now we must hire people that are going to help us. That is the part of selecting. In the textbook, you will see it's on the next page, page 248, selecting, training, and controlling interviewers. The most important part of this section, it's basically the task requirements. So please highlight in the textbook on page 249, you will see just before those 8 bullets, which are written in bold, your communication, interpersonal relationships, they wrote them, the task requirements determine the personal requirements of the field worker. So if you can highlight that where it says the following requirements can be used as guidelines. If you are using a pencil, you can also write important or NP next to that. That is the most important thing of this chapter, whereby you must hire people that are going to help you with data collection. But now these people must meet certain criteria. And then in terms of marketing research, we look into this criteria. So you must understand all this. What does communication entail? So every field worker that works in marketing research must be a good communicator or a good receiver or sender, which means that they must basically understand. They should be able to communicate. They should be able to use non-verbal language as well to the respondents. Remember, most of the time, just talking without non-verbal language, there is no pictures, there is no illustration, there is no hands, gestures. We need people that are able to communicate. So communication is key to those interviewers or field workers. The next one is interpersonal relations. And then you will see in the textbook, they define it nicely there. The field worker must get on well with people and be accepted by other people. What do we mean by that? Be accepted by other people. In other words, we are simply talking about that we are conducting interviews, and then these interviews, maybe we are interviewing students at TUT. Most of the time, students will respond to other students. So if we hire other students, those students will be accepted because they are same peers and so on. It will be difficult if you, for example, you are conducting interviews about disability or people living with disabilities, and then you don't hire even one person living. So it's easier if people are accepted, which means those people are the same peers and so on. The next one is language proficiency. It talks about the field worker being capable of good verbal expression, preferably being able to communicate in more than one official language. You will see language proficiency. It talks about being them being they can speak Zulu, for example, they can speak one of the languages that we find in another province like Limpopo, and then they have English. So let's say maybe they should be able to speak Zulu, they should be able to speak English, and they should be able to speak Sotho. And then in that way, they are able to accommodate most of our respondents. Afrikaans at some stage, if that, it will always depend on the subject matter and what our interview is about. But language proficiency, it just talks about being able to use more than one communication language, just in case you have to change words and you have to assist those interviewers or respondents to understand the questionnaire. Responsibility, adaptability, sensitivity, emotional control, and acceptability, they are all part of those requirements. But I want you to also highlight the other 4 in the textbook. So you will see the slide is having those 8, but there's other 4 that are important. At the bottom of the page, you will see they say other important characteristics are neutrality, motivation, patience, and honesty. So you highlight those 4 as well. So how can you expect to be assessed on this question? That is an important part. So if you read the case study, if we provide you with the case study, think about people that are going to be doing the interviews and think about which ones of these are the most important ones. So let's say out of these 8 or out of these 12, including those 4 at the bottom, which 3 are the most important to consider when the subject is about student, is a research about NSFAS. And then you will be able to say, you know what, communication will always be important. Things such as emotional control now plays a role, because when you're talking about things such as NSFAS, we're talking about disadvantaged backgrounds, we're talking about income and so on. So you don't want someone who does not have emotional control there. So you must be able to think practically and say, you know what, I should be able to say, out of these, all of them, which are the mostly important and why, depending on a subject matter. If you are using something that is different as well, let's say maybe you are conducting research and this research is about something that only applies to a certain specific group of gender. That could be, for example, the research is only for females, about females, or it's about males. And then you will see things such as interpersonal relation plays a huge role, that you want to hire females to interview other females, or you want to hire males to interview other males. And that just makes it the interview process to be more acceptable, to be actually more flexible, and then for embarrassing questions, for sensitive questions, and so on. So it's just a matter of practicality and knowing that out of all these ones, which one are important in a different subject or in a different topic. And lastly, that's something that we consider in the fieldwork program. You will see it on the next page, page 250, training of field workers there. Remember, if you look at this process, integrated process that we have looked into, first of all, we're going to do that one page of the program. What are we going to do each day? And then we do the administrative requirements. This is whereby we indicate or we print, buy stationery and so on. And now we hire people. So we've hired these 10 students, we've hired these 10 field workers. And now, after we've hired them, we train them. And then after training, they can start doing data collection. So under training, it's only a few things that we do, where we provide them with training manuals. Those could be a book. For example, as marketing research students at the moment, you've got a manual, which is a textbook. And then if there are training classes, maybe we say we conduct one class, they do role playing there. How are you going to be able to handle questions such as maybe I'm in a rush, I cannot participate, or maybe they made the mistakes. So the training is always about role playing in most of the time. And then we also conduct field training. So remember, training classes, this happens maybe in the office, but field training, it simply means it happens in the field. So if you're going to conduct research at main lane, it will be nicer to go for one day and do field training at main lane. Actually, it's also called pilot testing. It could also be called a preliminary study. That's whereby we are able to identify practical real-world problems, and as well as how to handle those problems. So a pilot study is part of the fieldwork training that we have there. And then if we are able to understand all this, you will see and why we said fieldwork, it's only applicable to personal interviews, not telephone interviews, not web-based, because there is no need to do all these things in a web-based interview, because now we will be sending a link to people, so you don't necessarily need to hire interviewers, you don't need to print questionnaires that we talked about under preparing here and so on. So hence now I think it makes more sense, or it's more clear now why we when we consider the definition of fieldwork, and we say it only applies out of an office, it only applies to personal interviews. The last thing that you have to highlight in the textbook, you will see they talk about survey errors. So after we have trained the field workers, we need to consider what survey errors that could happen. This is another practical question. You must also write NB next to it there. It also goes to the research proposal. This part, remember when we do your sampling plan. So in the sampling plan there at the end, there's somewhere where you indicate what are the possible survey errors and how you're going to eliminate those errors. So this page is actually very important about those survey errors, because it's the only page that in this chapter, it talks to the research proposal, or it's having something that is related to the research proposal. All those things that we've discussed, they are not part of the research proposal, like your fieldwork program and so on, but survey errors are part of your research proposal in the sampling plan. So let's look at those survey errors. You can highlight on page 152. At the bottom there, they say the following are some typical errors made by interviewers and respondents. The first one could be a respondent selection error. That's whereby someone who does not supposed to be participating in the study end up participating in the study. So basically, we're talking about things such as you will see we're supposed to interview people between the age of 16 to 20, but someone participated who's older. It could be about we want to interview students and this person is not a student, so it's a respondent selection area, or we had to interview males and this person is female and so on. So it simply means the wrong respondent. And then questioning errors, number 2. you can understand that it means that we have used wrong words to ask questions to the respondents, which in other words, it will lead us to getting wrong answers. So let's use a practical example here. For example, if we ask a question such as, are you coming from a disadvantaged background? That is a broad term word that they love to use, a disadvantaged background. And then what is exactly disadvantaged background? Does it mean that I come from poor family? Does it mean that I come from a village whereby there was no electricity but my family was rich, and so on? So think about the questioning words that you are using. So make it as simple as possible, as specific as possible as well. Recording errors, that's the third one. That's when we capture the data. It happens a lot whereby basically when we capture the data, instead of typing 9, we type 6. It's just a typing error basically that happens in terms of the recording error. So this happens once we have actually collected the data. We're just transferring that data into a system. Once again, this error will not be a huge deal in a web-based. All these errors you see are a huge deal when it comes to a personal interviews. But if you talk about web-based, when you talk about things such as mail survey, and the other method of collecting data, which is not personal interviews, all these errors, for example, in the web-based survey, you can avoid respondent selection error because the system can automatically select those respondents for you. The recording errors, they won't happen because as they type, the data is already captured automatically. There is no data capturing from a paper to a computer. Cheating errors, or these ones, we must be very careful with them. You will see they talk about respondents, not respondents, cheating errors. The cheating errors are made by the field workers, interviewers. Those are the ones that make these errors. For example, cheating, it's simply talking about faking the answers, fabricating possible answers, completing the questionnaires yourself as a field worker and say the respondents completed this questionnaire. In marketing research, there are many methods that we can use which have been proven effective to counter or eliminate or minimize all these errors. So talking about cheating errors, for example, we can see that if we want interviewers, we want to avoid them to cheat, we can supervise them. For example, when they work under supervision, they tend to cheat less or they don't cheat at all because they're always under, there's a supervisor. Remember, supervision, it does not mean another person is just looking at you, or in the supervision could also be about maybe they are conducting telephone interviews, and during these telephone interviews, all the conversation are recorded. So it shows that there is some sort of element of supervision that takes place there. Inability to answer error, there is difference between these two, and please tend to not to use them, these words, interchangeably because they mean different things. The last one, it talks about unwillingness to answer, whereas the second last one, it says inability to answer. So let's read what the definition in the textbook for a clear understanding. With inability to answer, they say it occurs when the respondent is not in a position to answer the question asked. The respondents cannot, if you want to use it different ways, the respondents cannot be able to remember information. The respondents cannot be able to answer a question. So the question is valid, but the respondent does not have an answer to it. For example, this could be a question such as, how many sodas have you bought in the last year? So it does not mean that basically I'm actually not willing to answer. I'm willing to answer that question, how many cans of sodas or how many 2 liters of cold drink I bought last year. Just I cannot remember such information. I'm unable to answer such questions. So that could be an error whereby we ask questions where respondents won't have answers to. Unwillingness to answer. Respondents, now this is the different one. Respondents, if you read in the textbook, it says it occurs when the respondent is not willing to answer the question or gives a misleading answer. So most of the time, unwillingness to answer errors is whereby we ask embarrassing question and then this respondent says, no, I'm not comfortable answering that question. Or for example, they will just lie to you. For example, if you, it tends to happen a lot with the demographics, whereby we ask the respondents questions such as, what is your monthly income after deductions? And when we ask those questions, some of the time, remember, income is confidential, and it could also be an embarrassing question. So I can end up lying and say I earn something such as 100,000 because I'm embarrassed to say I'm earning 5,000 a month and so on. So think about the difference between unwillingness error and inability to answer error, because those are two different aspects, as well as how can you eliminate or how can you minimize these errors. That's the important part, not just to identify these are the errors that could occur. When they occur, what are we going to do? So I want you to refer to these slides as well as to chapter 8. So somewhere in the textbook or where you're making notes, just write there chapter 8 slides or chapter 8 voice recording for those suggestion how to eliminate this error. So we've covered this part. I'm just going to take you back so that you understand where can I get this information. So on this slide is chapter 8 slide, this one, and you will see it talks about all those errors. They come again here, and then it talks about the suggestions. So these suggestions are just practical. For example, this non-respond area, respondents refuse to participate in a survey, we can offer remuneration. So if they are not willing to answer, we can avoid embarrassing questions. If we've got interviewing of wrong respondents, which was an error, we can train the interviewers. Things such as administrative error, how we can counter that, for example, where we capture wrong information. We can conduct data cleaning or data validation. Data cleaning and data validation is the next chapter to discuss it into detail, but it talks about maybe you capture the data and then you recapture the data again, and then you compare the data to find if there are any differences in the data, or you ask someone else to validate the data, which means he properly look into the questionnaires that were printed and completed, and he compares that with the data that was completed was captured on the system on the Microsoft Excel. So you have these suggestions, but don't limit yourself. Think out of the box as well. But if you also don't want to actually make things difficult for you, use even all these suggestions. They are valid here, they've been tested, and they work. So you've got all those suggestions to eliminate the errors there. So this brings us to the end of the theory part of this chapter. You'll see that's the end of the page. So now the next step is for us to reflect on this by playing a game or a quizzes game, whereby we try and answer those questions. So it's only 9 questions, with one question taking about 60 seconds. So take your time to understand the question. Don't rush the quiz to answer it, because it will help you a lot to understand the practicality part and how you answer those questions. So I'm gonna write it here and post it as well, or on the chat box, the learning activity. But basically this learning activity, it's about the case study I sent you yesterday. So you have it on WhatsApp, you have it on your emails, that case study. So if you are able to open it, so we're gonna start by reading that case study. And there are 2 case studies, so I must be very specific which case study I'm talking about. So let's quickly open that case study as well. So if marketing research, this email that I've sent yesterday indicating that we have class, there is an attachment there. So if you open that case study, you'll see learning activity 11. It's about students' daily TV schedule. You'll remember the previous chapter where we designed the sampling plan. We also use the same case study here. So we at least have some sort of background information about this case study. So whenever I send you these case studies before class, please read them before class, because we're not going to have time during the class session. So in the next 5 or 10 minutes, if you did not read this case study before, it's just 1 paragraph. So you can read it quickly, open it on your site, because on my site, I'm just loading the quizzes, and then you join the quizzes game and you are able to play the game. So I'll be providing those game codes so long while you read the case study, just to reflect. And we'll be answering basically these questions that are here. So all these questions that you see here, so you can also try and understand and try and think about an answer before, because all the quizzes about this answers here, but you won't be providing answers. You'll be playing the game in terms of choosing the multiple choice and so on. So think about your answers. Think about question 1 that you have there so long in the next 2 to 3 minutes, and then we're going to start the game together and play the game, and then we're going to reflect on the game to see where you struggled and how you can improve that as well. So let's write those instructions. So it's going to be learning activity 2, and we're going to say here, read the case study in learning activity 11. The case study is about students' daily TV schedule. And after you've done that, you can join the quizzes game. So I'm going to be starting the game now so that we generate the game code. So for the best experience, once again, it will be nicer if you are having a smartphone next to you and then you play the game on the smartphone while you are looking at the leaderboard on the screen, because it works nicer with the second device. But if you are using one device, you can, like I'm doing, using different tabs there. You have your case study, you've got quizzes, because you're gonna need my main screen of Microsoft Team apps to show you the leaderboard. So while you are answering question after answering every question, just check the leaderboard score on the normal screen here to see whether you are number 1 or number 2 and how are you doing with the rest of the other members. So let's quickly start the game here. So like I've indicated, is only 9 questions with only 60 seconds for each question. So right now it's 2 o'clock. So we will say up until 2:10. That's when we're gonna end the game. So let's quickly make it a live game. Once again, remember, if it's a live game, it means you can only play it now while together with everyone. You won't be able to play the game later on or at your own time. And I'm just gonna check here the settings. Okay, everything seems fine. So starting the game, and some of you have played quiz before, so you know all these instructions, but I'm gonna once again copy it and paste it on the Microsoft Teams app as well. So there is our game code. Okay, so those instructions there. So there is our link. First thing, you go to that link, joinmyquiz.com. So that's your first step. You enter game code. You use any nickname there. You don't need to use a student number, and then you can start the game. So this is a 9 minutes game. So let's say up until 2:10 here, we should be done. We're gonna make it 12 past. And 9 minutes. All right, I'm gonna post this instruction on the chat box. So if you need this instruction, because I'm gonna be muted myself here, so that you can concentrate on the game, and I'm gonna start the game for those who start early. So if you follow the instruction, I should be able to have some participants here. So I'm waiting for at least one participant to join the game, then I'm starting the game immediately. So ladies and gentlemen, have fun, enjoy the game. Please take your time, don't rush to answer, and we will have a reflection exercise afterwards. So I'll still be here. If you have any questions, you can just unmute your mic, but I'll just be quiet so that you concentrate there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna be ending the game now. So if you are still playing, I'm gonna give you the extra 60 seconds. Just play faster because we'll have to generate the report and just discuss feedback. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be ending the game now, and then we can quickly discuss feedback. This is an important or critical part of discussion of feedback, so we all understand which answers we got wrong and why we got them wrong. So let's quickly end the game so that we can generate that feedback. All right. First of all, congratulations, Schema, maintaining the first position there. Schema, would you like to unmute the mic and have a thank you message? You'd like to thank your parents, your mom and dad, maybe? All right. In terms of maintaining that first position, you will see here in terms of the questions, it shows us the questions that you struggled with, where we've got 0%. That question 1, you can see no one got it correct. So let's quickly go to those questions and see. Question 1, the red one, we're just going to discuss feedback to that. So 0 correct answer. So let's look at the question. The question was saying, according to the case study, as this research is conducted by a non-profit organization, only limited budget, which is 30,000, has been allocated and the data must be collected very quickly. So that statement, first of all, it tells us that they need a data collection methods that's going to be fast and that's not going to cost them a lot of money. We know personal interviews cost a lot of money. They take a lot of time. So it's definitely they should not conduct personal interviews. It further states a list containing details of 25,000 respondents residing in Gauteng who indicated that they consume alcohol and are interested to participate in a survey have been provided. So we've got the list containing the details. So in that list, obviously we can have their contact details, their names and so on. So in other words, we do have an option to use something such as web-based survey here. Indicate whether the fieldwork process applies to the proposed research project. And if we look at the answers, all of you said yes, the fieldwork process applies, but it does not apply because we are not conducting personal interviews. If we have this limited budget, we can do something such as telephone interviews. And when we conduct telephone interviews or when we conduct web-based interviews, we don't necessarily need to print the questionnaires. We don't necessarily need to have the map of places. So the fieldwork applies basically to the one that is done out of office. Remember, once it's done inside an office, it's no longer field work. So any data collection methods whereby we're going to conduct this field work remotely from the respondents, that's why we say no, the field work process does not apply. Yes, we will collect the data, but we won't collect the data using field work. That's what it means. I'm not sure if that is clear. You can just quickly let me know if maybe you have any comment there. I would understand if maybe some of you said, yes, it applies because maybe we're going to conduct telephone interviews. If you conduct telephone interviews, we'll need to hire interviewers who are gonna call the respondents. But once again, remember, if they are calling them from the office, it's still not fieldwork. Let's look at question number 5, where we've got a red flag there, but there were 3 correct answers, 3 incorrect. Which important aspect of fieldwork are researchers considering when they brief field workers and provide manual and classes about data collection? So we know that is training. So let's look at the answer there. Training was the correct answer. Remember, all these steps, we don't have field workers. We're only gonna basically recruit them on this step under selecting. But the question here is about providing the manual. It's about providing classes. So that will be part of training. And the other last question, where I saw a red flag that we need to quickly discuss. The other one, question 6, you see it's green. It means all of you got it correct. The yellow ones are not too bad. It's more than 50%. But these red ones, like this question, only one person got it correct. You will see it say select a suggestion to eliminate a survey error whereby field workers interview grade 12 learners instead of university students. So we already know that it's a wrong selection of respondents error. So the question, it wants you to select one suggestion there whereby you can eliminate that. So proper training and supervision of interviewers, it will work better because we can interview the correct respondents. You'll see all these other suggestions, they are not about wrong respondent selection. For example, offer remuneration is about when they are not willing to participate. Data cleaning and validation, I can see 3 players selected that answer. I won't oppose this answer. I think you are also correct. If you conduct data cleaning and validation, what it simply means, so this answer was also correct. I'm glad actually I've got something such as this one whereby I thought only this answer was only correct. But now when I put myself in your shoes in terms of the understanding, if interviewers interview grade 12 learners, if we conduct data cleaning, the data cleaning will tell us that these questionnaires are not applicable, or these questionnaires or this data for these respondents, it's wrong respondents. So when you conduct data cleaning, it simply means we'll only remove those questionnaires and throw them away because they were not part of it. So it's still a correct answer. I fully agree there. So ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our learning session. It has been fun. I hope you enjoyed the learning session as well. So before you leave, lastly, please in the chat box there, please say your goodbyes, comment with a smiley face if you are happy or any mood there, and have a lovely day, and we'll continue with the communication process on our WhatsApp or other platforms. So goodbye, have a lovely day, ladies and gentlemen.
Sir.
Yeah, Bo.
Sorry to disturb, but
No problem.
You didn't say anything about the test you wrote.
Yeah, the test you wrote is because I've only marked like 20 or 20%, so I'm not done marking yet. So
I mean due to what we were complaining.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm saying I'm not done marking yet. So the marks will determine the future direction that needs to be taken. Because remember, at the moment, most of you were actually complaining about the time. That's saying that the time was not enough. So the only way we can validate that is to look through your marks and look through whether you've completed all the sections. So as I was marking, I did notice some of the students whereby it says no text entered, meaning that maybe you didn't even reach that question or you didn't have enough time for that. So all those things are still under discussion. I'll brief you further, but it will only be determined once we have marked everything, because your marks are the ones that actually guides us to take a future step regarding that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so once we're done marking, we'll brief you on the way forward, because the idea is that what if although you did not complete the test, all of you passed, got 75, 60% and so on, and you had to write again. So it's not ideal. So let's look at the marks first.
Okay.
All right. Okay, thank you for that participation, for those who participated. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording now so that we can upload that. So stopping the recording.